Hi everyone. Tonight we're going to be learning about common denominators and equivalent fractions. A vocabulary term you need to know for this chapter is common denominator. A common denominator is a common multiple of two or more denominators to write fractions that name the same part of a whole. Okay, so the first thing we need to do to find common denominators is make lists of the multiples of each denominator. Now, when you think multiple, think multiply. So when I'm giving multiples, I'm multiplying each time. My first fraction is 2/3. I'm focused on the denominator, which is 3. So I'm going to be making a list of the multiples of 3. So we have 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24. I could keep going, but for right now I'm going to stop there. Now I'm going to focus in on my second fraction, which is 3/4. Again, I'm looking at the denominator. In this case, the denominator is 4. So I'm going to list multiples of 4. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28. I'm going to go ahead and stop there so I can take a moment to compare my lists. Since I'm looking for common denominators, I need to find common multiples. So I'm going to look and circle any multiples I find in both of my lists. I see 12, and I also see 24 on both lists. So 12 and 24 are common multiples of 3 and 4. Since you see the pencil symbol on this slide, go ahead and pause the video. Write both fractions and list their multiples of denominators underneath. Then circle the multiples they have in common. When you finish, hit play and continue. Now that we listed our multiples, we can use those to find common denominators and then make equivalent fractions. Now that we found our common multiples, we can use those to make common denominators and then make equivalent fractions. Remember our original fractions were 2/3 and 3/4. We found that our least common multiple, or the least number that we found on both lists, was 12. So I'm going to rewrite my new denominator as 12 on both fractions. Now think to yourself, I went from 3 to 12. What could I multiply to get from 3 to 12? Well, 3 times 4 is 12. Whatever you do to the denominator, you also have to do to the numerator. So I have to multiply 2 times 4, which is 8. 8/12 is equivalent to 2/3. My fraction at the bottom, 3/4. In order to go from 4 to 12, I had to multiply by 3. Whatever I do to the denominator, I also have to do to the numerator. If I multiplied the 4 times 3, I have to multiply 3 times 3, which is 9. 9/12 is equivalent to 3/4. I could find other equivalent fractions as well using those same lists. Remember, in the previous slide, we also circled 24 as a common multiple. What if I had rewritten my fractions with denominators of 24? I make my new denominator on both sides 24. I would do the same process for finding an equivalent fraction with 24 as a denominator. So I think, how did I go from 3 to 24? I would multiply by 8. Whatever I do to the denominator, I also have to do to the numerator. Since I multiplied 3 times 8, I also have to multiply that 2 times 8. 2 times 8 is 16. So 16/24 is equivalent to 2/3 and is also equivalent to 8/12. Do the exact same thing for 3/4. In order to go from 4 to 24, I have to multiply by 6. So I'm also going to multiply my numerator, that 3, by 6. 3 times 6 is 18. So 18/24 is equivalent to my 3/4, which is also equivalent to my 9/12. All of those fractions are equivalent. Let's put it all together. Mindy bought 5/8 pounds of almonds and 3/4 pounds of walnuts. What fractions would be equivalent to the amounts Mindy bought? Well, let's start by listing multiples of the denominators of each of our fractions. We have 5/8 and 3/4. Well, here, my denominator is 8, so I'm going to list multiples of 8. 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48. I'll stop there and see if it gives me enough. Then I'm going to look at my second denominator, which is 4. List multiples. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28. Now my problem asked me to find equivalent amounts. Well, let's look for the multiples that are in common. I have an 8 here and an 8 here. I have a 16 and a 16. So I can list some equivalent fractions. 5/8, if I rewrite a new denominator of 8, would still be 5/8, and they want a new fraction. So let's look at the 16ths. If I rewrite 5/8 to have a denominator of 16, then I think in order to go from 8 to 16, I have to multiply that denominator by 2. So I also have to multiply the numerator by 2. So an equivalent fraction to 5/8 is 10/16. Let's look at the 3/4. If I want to make an equivalent fraction to 3/4, I have a couple options here. I could make it with 8 as the denominator. 4 times 2 is 8. 3 times 2 is 6. If I wanted a common denominator with my fraction up here, which was 10/16, I could make 16 my denominator. 3/4. 4 times 4 is 16, so 3 times 4 is 12. So 3/4, 6/8, and 12/16 are all equivalent fractions. Now it's time to summarize what you've learned in this video in your journal. So in your math journal, describe how you would rewrite the fractions 1/6 and 1/4 with the least common denominator. In your response, be sure to use the words multiples, common denominator, and equivalent fractions. Underline these words in your response so they are easy for your teacher to see. If you need to, go back and rewatch the video to help you better understand. Have a good night.